afternoon. Welcome to the UK Column Live Take 2. Afternoon, Brian.
Afternoon. Well, it's a sunny day out there, blue sky, very cold. We had some frost this morning, not a lot of wind, so not a bad day here in Plymouth, England. Bit chilly though, bit chilly in the studio.
Freezing.
Yeah. Well, your choice of the Daily Star for the first.
The Daily Star. I haven't seen it anywhere else actually. Cop shops are going to be opening in mosques. Well, not only mosques, supermarkets, football stadiums, libraries, cafes and churches. Plans could see up to 65 empty police stations sold off and turned into flats to meet the budget cuts of up to 20%. The police stations are to be opened in mosques, supermarkets, football stadiums. Members of the public reporting crime will have to go to access points instead of into their local police station. Community centres, churches and cafes and libraries are also going to be used if a trial in London is successful. The Met Police are already earmarked a couple of places in London, which is Costa Coffee in Highgate and Tottenham Hotspur football ground at White Hart Lane, to sort of start these plans out and of opening these access points. Before we restarted, Brian, you made the good observation about the private security firms. It will probably be them that's running these access points.
Well, I think it's doing three things. It's blatantly undermining the police. The public, if there's a crime or you've got something important to report, want to deal with a proper police constable. And this, of course, is putting somebody else in the way. Who are they going to bring in? They're going to bring in private security firms. G4S, there's a good company. Let's bring them in. Or Serco, or it's going to be one of these very big names. And, of course, who is handling your data? You have no idea. And I think the third thing is that by spreading the reporting points, you're helping to create this sort of snitch culture, which we're going to mention a bit later, I think. You've got to join the dots with what's happening here, that basically we are seeing a surveillance state being brought in. So you want to have the surveillance, the policing all spread out there amongst a number of agencies. So if I was a police constable watching what was going on here, not only is this a direct attack on my job, but this is a direct attack on proper policing in the country.
There are a lot of stations that are closed down now. You know, there's one in my little local village. There is a police station, but you go there and the doors are shut, and you have to go 17 miles to the nearest one because it's an unmanned station. So we're not even going to have those now. The
lie is there is no money. This is the line of David Cameron and George Osborne. It's an absolute lie, of course, because money can be printed by the state and issued as credit. That's been done before. But the excuse is there's no money in the fraudulent banking system, therefore we need the cutbacks. And in making the cutbacks, they can introduce the policy that they really want. So control of the press we're going to be talking about today. This is controlling of policing in Britain. What we've got is a cross-party agenda to build a dictatorship. That's what's coming.
Definitely.
Children have a bit in the spotlight, in your opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I found this on Natural News, and I urge everyone just to go and take a look. It's a big article, too long to go through. But modern children are being poisoned like never before, according to Natural News. The rate of autism in America alone has skyrocketed to 1 in 88 children over the last few decades, putting autism squarely in the epidemic category. And Natural News have listed the 10 most poisonous things that are affecting our children. Multiple vaccinations that inject mercury, aluminium, MSG and formaldehyde into children. 2, mercury fillings. 3, school lunches that use toxic processed food ingredients, including sodium nitrate. I've got a really good story on school lunches, which I'll bring up one day.
Okay.
Television programming that poisons children's brain with messages of materialism and inadequacy. I mean, we know about the BBC.
Yeah, anorexia, that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Public education that teaches a revision of history and toxic ideas about society. Toxic personal care products with cancer-causing poisons, shampoos, skincare, toothpaste, air fresheners, laundry, soaps, detergents, etc. Hydrofluoric acid being dumped into water supplies after being mislabelled fluoride. Toxic indoor air environments at homes and schools with such things as mould, glue, synthetic pollutants. Video games, obviously, because it's just
killing
and maiming and whatever on the video games, and the mind-altering psychiatric drugs, such as Ritalin, and we know so much about that. So I do urge people, it's very, very long to go through, but just take a look onto the Natural News website. The list is in there, and educate yourself and your friends.
Mike's got some comments here, I think.
Just one. I mean, I don't want to undermine this article at all. Good article, but I'm just a bit worried about statistics with regard to autism and other similar conditions, because there's a lot of pressure on parents, particularly parents that are getting some kind of benefits. There's actually incentives in place to register their children as being special needs of some kind, being autistic or being ADHD and whatnot. So I believe that's skewing those statistics somewhat. I'm not, as I say, I'm not attempting to undermine what Natural News is saying here, because I think they're bang on the money, but we need to be a bit careful about these stats sometimes.
Yeah, this is for America, these stats, though. So.
Well, as we always say, please listen and watch what we're talking about, listen to what we say, go away and check the facts for yourselves. That's the important thing, that people are learning for themselves and not believing the propaganda which the state is churning out.
And when you do that, it really empowers you as well,
I
find.
Well, this is a little article, I think this was mine actually. Charities cannot rely on handouts, says Aid Minister Lynn Featherstone. I'm just absolutely fascinated about this, because what we've seen over particularly the Blair years, but of course carried on with the cross-party agenda with David Cameron and Mr Clegg, Lib Dem lackey, is that we have expanded the charity sector in order to create the so-called third sector, the third way of politics, and that's now being reinforced with the use of basic, I'm going to loosely label it Marxism with Saul Alinsky, but basically the government has deliberately expanded the charity sector, so the average person thinks, particularly at Christmas time, that a charity is somewhere where somebody's out with a little bucket at the supermarket collecting and very dedicated to what they do. But the truth is that charities in Britain have now become a minimum of a £44 billion industry, well over 177,000 charities. And of course, if you look into the biggest charities, what you're actually looking at is not a real charity, it's a pseudo-charity that's directly feeding off government money. And I have to say a classic example of that is political charity Common Purpose, which simply swallows up taxpayers' money under the false premise that they're actually out there for the good of the wider society. But this article was also interesting because of this lady, Lynn Featherstone, because she's not only talking about charity, she's now actually fighting for the rights of women all over the world.
That's
so
good of her.
She hasn't got enough to do with being a Lib Dem MP and looking after women in UK or people who can't feed themselves in UK. This woman, a bit like Tony Blair, is on a mission. But I have to say, as a bloke, I found her comments very, very interesting. If I can just call these up on screen. She says, where do men get off? Just because they are physically stronger or more economically powerful, they feel they can coerce women into lives we don't want, into sexual relations we don't want. So this is pretty aggressive stuff. Does she actually think that all men in UK fall into this bracket? And if she does, why is she actually working for Mr Clegg and a male-dominated Lib Dem party? It's arrogance, isn't it? It's unbelievable arrogance. But of course, she's working with the Department for International Development, so she's giving money away overseas, and I think you're going to mention something on that a bit later.
Yeah. I mean, why is she made? I mean, this statement's just bizarre. I mean, if she's got such a problem with it, she walks away and does something about it, doesn't she? Yeah,
well, we're seeing more and more British politicians. They're not actually bothered with people in Britain. They're bothered with these wider overseas goals. And of course, if we have a look at the Department for International Development, you find that we're doing all sorts of stuff. It's okay. that was the next article, which we wanted to move on to pretty quickly. Strange things happening in the press at the moment, and we've gritted our teeth here, and we've got a BBC News report on this lady. What have you picked up on this story, Mike? There's something unsavoury about what is going on around the tragic death of this nurse.
Well, no, all I was highlighting here is that the post-mortem is to be done today. And if you show the next one, no, that's not it.
That one there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So this was an article from Gulf News because basically she lived and worked in Oman for quite some time, and this is another example. I mean, yesterday we were highlighting the fact that her family are really surprised by the possibility that she may have committed suicide. Shocked is maybe a better word. Certainly, these people, the Gulf News has interviewed some people that knew her while she was and worked with her while she was living in Oman, and their comment is she was too level-headed a person to do something like this.
Yeah.
So the post-mortem is today, as reported by the BBC. We'll see what comes out of that, but there's something fishy about this, and you just wonder, is it going to be another David Kelly-style cover-up?
Well, I'll just jump back to the previous slide here. This is the Independent. They actually had a little video clip with this gentleman, of course, is Keith Vaz. And it's remarkable, but all of a sudden Keith Vaz has jumped into this story. Many people have been contacting the UK column, saying that they think that what's actually going on is that this story is being ramped up a bit as with Millie Dowler, in order to be able to get this massive attack on the perpetrators of the hoax.
Yep.
In Australia, and it's an unbelievable coincidence that we've got Mr. Leveson. So he writes a report absolutely calling for state control of the press in Britain. He runs away to Australia, and the next minute there just happens to be a story that starts from Australia, where now we can see what's going to come is it's absolutely disgraceful. People, let's have more rules, more clampdowns.
Talking of Australia, somebody's just posted in the chat box that Patrick Henningson's website, 21st Century Wire, has put a story out. Australia has become the 53rd state of the United States of America. So I'm not too sure on that. I'll have to check. I'll have a look now in a minute and see what Patrick's saying about it. But just interesting that Australia apparently is full in with them.
I'll just add another bit on this. If you go back through the press reports on the, we're having a few problems today. It's okay. If we go back to the press reports talking about the tragic death of this nurse, initially the Met Police were reporting that she was found unconscious. Then the next minute she's dead.
Yeah.
Then we're saying it's suicide, but usually if you get suicides that are reported, believed to have
usually
how they have unfortunately done it.
Usually pills or something around.
Absolutely. So we have this bizarre trail with this lady, and the family, of course, as we reported yesterday, is saying that they're not being given answers. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what comes out of this result. But I think what is happening is that this tragic event, however it's come about, is now going to be used to absolutely go for further clampdowns on non-official radio and TV. And on that happy subject, we could call that picture up again. We're just putting up a snapshot of Ben Fellowes' personal, it's a blog technically, isn't it?
Yeah.
Blog site. Ben Fellowes, the man who exposed the, what's the word? The madness going on around G4S and protection of the Olympic. And since then, he's made some fairly serious accusations against senior politicians. But we understand from Ben that he had a surprise phone call.
Indeed he did.
I'm going to say supposedly from a member of Leveson's panel, effectively saying that because Ben had spoken out as he had, revealing or making some serious allegations about a senior politician, that he could expect, that there was going to be an absolute focus on him and other people reporting this, because the aim of the Leveson inquiry was to start a massive attack on free press and media. Yeah. And it was extraordinary, but UK Column Live had some contact, we will say, with a person connected to the BBC. And so within 24 hours of Ben Fellows receiving this very interesting phone call, supposedly from a friend, but the message was very much take care because there's retribution coming from the Leveson team or as a result of the inquiry. Within 24 hours, we've suddenly got approaches to the UK column, it would appear, from the BBC, and we're going to tell you a bit more about the BBC. So what's happening there, just stay posted and do read what not only Ben Fellows has been saying, but you might also like to have a look at Patrick Henningson's site, 21st Century Wire. Well, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Louise just happened to notice today that if we go to the BBC website, bear in mind we can't feed ourselves, the police can't do their job, people haven't got work, our young people are in debt. This is the BBC website today, and the most important story is a sheepskin wearing monkey that went into IKEA.
Yeah, it went into IKEA, and that's the top story today with the BBC.
Just in case you can't work out from the screen, we'll highlight the monkey for you. Now, as usual, there's a sort of humorous side to this, but I really wanted to focus and put this story against something a lot more serious going on in the background. Because, of course, the BBC is still absolutely at the centre of the Jimmy Savile paedophile scandal. We've had the BBC paying out £185,000 of taxpayers' money to Mr McAlpine. No real explanation given to the public of why that deal was done. The public hasn't been allowed to see what sort of contractual arrangements were in place. So the BBC, as usual, claiming to be the beacon for fair, honest and open reporting. But when it comes to seeing what this gentleman, Mr Chris Patton, was doing, we're not allowed to be told. No. Now, on the subject of Mr Patton, the UK column wrote to him fairly recently. This is the content of what we said. I note the current furore regarding BBC involvement with the Jimmy Savile affair, Lord McAlpine, and investigations regarding the abuse of children. I also note the speed at which the BBC has paid out £185,000 of public licence payers' money in a speedy settlement with Lord McAlpine. Meanwhile, hundreds of children and young people have been abused and continue to be abused, and the abusers are still at large, and this whole issue goes largely unreported by the BBC. So that, of course, was a generalised statement of affairs. And then we asked a question: please can you confirm that BBC editors are now being advised by BBC senior management not to investigate and report on cases of child abuse and alleged child abuse? Now, we thought this was a fairly simple question for Mr Patton, and one which the BBC trustees would absolutely have an answer, bearing in mind what the BBC has just suffered with Jimmy Savile. Well, today, by second-class post, we got a reply, which we'll bring up on screen. So here's the letter. It was signed by Mr John Hamer, BBC Trust Unit. And if I blow the text up a little bit more, expand that text so you can read it. Dear Mr Gerrish, thank you for your letter to Lord Patton, Chairman of the BBC Trust. I'm responding on his behalf as a member of the Trust Unit, which supports and advises the Chairman and the trustees. I should explain that the role of the Trust is distinct to that of the BBC's management, and it has no role to play in day-to-day editorial issues. The Trust sets the overall strategy for the BBC, but responsibility for the BBC's editorial decisions rests with the Director-General as Editor-in-Chief. I have therefore passed your letter to BBC Audience Services so that they can provide you with a response on behalf of the BBC's management.
That just looks like a letter that's just, well, it's just on a file, isn't it? And you just fill in the blanks.
Well, you're spot on, Louise, because we actually asked this gentleman, well, we asked another lady at the BBC what this gentleman did, and he's a correspondence advisor for Mr. Patton. But a few minutes before the show, we were able to speak to this gentleman. And in the conversation, some rather remarkable things emerged, because it became clear that, well, it was totally uncertain as to whether Mr. Patton had actually read the letter at all. I rather suspect that the reply had simply been sent by this young gentleman. It was quite clear that the BBC Trust does not appear to know what the BBC policy is now for the investigation and reporting of child abuse cases. And when I said, well, I've asked Mr. Patton and the BBC Trust this question, I have not asked the BBC, I've asked the Trust, what I got was a complete fob off, I think is the correct expression from this gentleman. And I then said, well, okay, who is now going to deal with this letter? Remember, we're talking about the protection of children and young people, we're talking about paedophiles, we're talking about child abuse. And he simply said, well, it's been passed to the complaints team. And I said, but that's a separate company from the BBC. And then this young gentleman, who I have to say was very polite with me, but it was quite clear he just did not grasp what was going on. So firstly, if you write to Chris Patton MP, don't believe that you're going to get a reply from him. You're going to get a reply from a correspondence advisor. The UK column can now announce, and hopefully it'll go onto the world stage to some extent, that basically even post-Savile, the BBC Trust still does not appear to have a proper policy on how they are protecting children and managing investigations to help put paedophiles in prison.
And according to rumours, another BBC star from the 80s and 90s in his 60s was picked up last night. I'm not going to mention any names because it isn't been confirmed, but yet another person on the BBC.
So it's fascinating that we've got people all across the country talking about children being taken under false pretences from their families. We've got people who are now over 18 reporting their own stories of unbelievable abuse within the so-called care system. We've got police officers talking about reports and investigations into paedophiles being suppressed. And what are the BBC doing about it? They are covering up. And we're going to have a special mention in due course of the Today, Radio 4 Today programme team, where they have not only refused to take action, they're now trying to accuse us of covering up the abuse of children. So we put that information to you. Does Chris Patton know what his job is? Does he even understand what's going on in the BBC? I don't think he does.
No,
sorry to be a bit strong on that.
Clearly not.
Well, a snoopers bill.
Yay. Found this in the Telegraph today. James Brockenshaw, who is a Conservative security minister, has come out and said there is work that needs to be done on the laws after a joint committee raised concerns over the trample over privacy. This committee, which was set up to examine the draft communications bill, warned security of overkill. But Nick Clegg's jumped in to call on ministers to rip up their plans and go back to the drawing board, deepening a rift with our lovely Theresa May. Theresa May is adamant that the new powers are needed to help catch terrorists and paedophiles. Under this draft communications bill, mobile phone and internet companies will have to keep every detail of their customers' activities for at least a year. It doesn't give the agencies the power to read messages, but timings and recipients would be recorded as well as logs of web pages visited. Ministers say it is necessary to allow the police and intelligence agencies to stay ahead of terrorists and paedophiles.
Isn't it incredible that the state talks about catching paedophiles, but then we have closed down on information. The state in Scotland spends a minimum of £500,000 trying to suppress the truth about Holly Gregg abuse coming out. We've got the BBC now clearly going quiet on paedophiles. They're not investigating, they're not taking proper reports.
Yeah.
But we use we're doing everything to find the paedophiles as a means of closing down.
Well, maybe they should start going have a look in Oxford, maybe.
Well, maybe they should, but I don't think they will.
No.
I'll just put this on screen. We've shown this before, but it's very, very important. Theresa May has set up a phenomenal network of reporting. Here she is in this little spider's web. I've also highlighted Julia Middleton from Common Purpose. And at the end of the day, we've got the private company, the Association of Police Officers, together with the security services, MI5, etc. But we've got Europol brought in, we've got SOCA. We printed this in the UK column, and essentially Theresa May has brought in a network to spy on people in this country, report on them, and that system is now backed up by the ability to section people who dare to speak out about the state. And sorry, Mike, can we just call that one back up again? I just wanted to just end on a note of this. A little bit small on the screen, but what I've ringed is the judiciary, because if you ask who is permitting, who's facilitating the setting up of this East German system, it is the judiciary in this country. And of course, Mr. Ken Clarke has been at the forefront of calling for more and more secret courts and no juries.
Yeah.
So we can watch this thing build in front of us. And we've got Mr. Clegg and the draft communications data bill.
That's what Louise has just talked about, so move on
yeah.
to the next one then.
Okay, well, have a look at this report. I just wanted to say that Mr. Clegg, of course, what a hypocrite, because who does he work for? The European Union, which is also introducing a massive network of state control, and now here he is trying to pretend to be squeaky clean over communication. Sheer hypocrisy. What's the White House got to say, Mike?
Well, this is related because, of course, what they're not telling us about this draft communications bill is that it's United Nations policy that's effectively being implemented. This week, the International Telecommunications Union is holding a conference, the World Conference in International Telecommunications, and the International Telecommunications Union reckons that it is responsible, it's a United Nations body, it reckons that it is responsible for regulating the internet. And surprisingly, last week, I think this was December the 5th, the House passed a resolution in the United States to say that they're not going to accept United Nations policy from the International Telecommunications Union, and I wanted to highlight that because while we're running ahead with this kind of UN policy being implemented in the UK, at least some people in the US think it's not a great idea, and I'm sure they'll come up with their own version of it in due course, but in the meantime, they're basically saying they're not accepting the ITU and they're not accepting the United Nations.
It's very interesting that the Americans have picked up on this because, of course, many people in this country simply look at the UN and they think it's simply a body to do good in the world. What they don't realise is that the UN is pumping out political agenda, political doctrine, which is clearly aimed at taking the world to a one world government system. So, of course, worldwide control of the press and media to prevent information coming out. So, some very good research that's been done in Wales is showing that the UN is already setting up, has got cells already set up across UK, which are taking UN policy and pushing it straight into the public sector and the civil service. And of course, we've recently had the UN setting up an embassy in Scotland, if my memory serves me correct. So the UN, absolutely not a benign organisation. The UN is the basis for the doctrine that we're seeing coming in across all three British parties. So well done, the Americans, for quashing this one. Banking.
Mike.
Right, so HSBC, the the money launderer for the drug barons of the world, and historically always has been, is paying out £1.2 billion to settle this fraud probe from the United States. Of course, £1.2 billion isn't going to do HSBC that much harm. What we need to see is the banks, governments around the world getting to grips with the banks completely. This fine, apparently, according to the Scotsman here, is coming as another London bank, Standard Chartered, agreed to pay a further $203 million to settle allegations that it breached U.S. sanctions with Iran. Yeah. So, again, more dirt from the banks, and they're paying the price to a certain degree. This is a fairly huge fine, it must be admitted, but where's the money going to go?
Well, I've got another point, and that is, it seems to me that if you're a banker and you commit a crime, as long as you can create enough money to pay off whatever the fine is, nothing happens to you. So bankers at the moment here are being rubber stamped that it doesn't matter what crime you commit, you are not going to be tried and put in prison for it. We see the same sort of stuff happening with judges. Well, few of those have been put in prison. But, the banks are printing their own money, so what difference does a £1.2 billion fine?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The odd trader, the odd rogue trader, ends up in prison or whatever. But it's never the bank management, never the people that are setting the policy.
So this is George Osborne's friends here being protected, basically.
Well, this is the HSBC. Historically, has been the foundation of the British trading empires over the last 250 years. So yes, the HSBC is as dirty as it gets.
Did the taxpayer pay any money? Give them any money? Did we? We gave Lloyds, didn't we?
No, we didn't.
We didn't.
No.
Oh, right, okay.
No, but they create it from nothing.
Yeah.
And we've got train fares going up here. Where did that one come from?
Michael
That came
again.
from me.
Okay.
I mean, I just wanted to make the point that communications are a fundamental part of any economy, and if it costs 26% more to move a person from one location to another, or to move goods from one location to another, when we've got the price of fuel going up constantly, this is not beneficial to the economy, the real economy. I just wanted to highlight again that policy is destroying the economy of this country.
Which it's designed to do, because the aim is to reduce
yes.
Britain to a shambles and a region of the bigger shambles, which is the the EU.
This has to be stopped, and it's about time George Osborne was taken to task in whatever way.
Yeah, and of course we've got the old business here, which is that the wider British public has paid for the rail infrastructure, and now what do? We bring in private companies to suck the money out with profit, or we bring in, even worse, we're bringing in overseas companies who are taking the benefit out of what is public infrastructure.
Yeah, and the other point to make here is that the two people in the photographs, the guy on the left is Mick Whelan, who's leader of the Train Drivers Union ASLEF. On the right we've got Francis O'Grady, who's TUC General Secretary Designate. And so these are two senior union figures who just don't get it. So he says that the fare hike was painful, and she says that train fares have massively outstripped inflation, and they're doing nothing to highlight this. They're doing nothing to promote proper economic policy on this, and these are the people that are supposed to be supporting the workers.
Well, of course, union people have been utterly betrayed, because the top officials of most of the major unions have been bought off with massive salaries and huge pension pots. So it's quite clear that all three parties, I mean, Labour's been at the heart, New Labour's been at the heart of this, of burying itself into the unions in order to buy them off and control them. But collapse of British infrastructure, deliberate policy.
And again, this is exactly the same. The other thing that the unions aren't doing is screaming about the types of jobs that are available for people. The Telegraph is calling the changes in the job market a seismic shift, and they're crowing about how there's this massive boost to UK economy, that the UK employment rather, that UK employment is remarkably resilient. You know, the key point, as I've said before, and I'll say it again, is that these are low-quality, part-time jobs that are being created. And as we pointed out yesterday or the day before, people are still underemployed. In other words, even people that have some of these jobs are not earning a living wage, and so they're having to take 2 or 3 jobs in order to just make ends meet. There's, despite the headlines of massive increase in the number of jobs each year, the jobs are such low quality that people have to take multiple jobs in order to make a living. There still aren't enough jobs in the economy to keep people at a standard of living.
Yeah. Again, I believe that's deliberate policy.
Yeah.
Now, we've got an interesting one here that you picked up, Mike, called Streetlink, which joins a few things together, really, that we've covered in the news today.
Well, this is quite an interesting one, because earlier on you were talking about charities and the charity sector, and of course this organisation, Streetlink, well, I'll just tell you what they say about themselves. Streetlink is a website that enables the public to alert local authorities in England about rough sleepers in their area. This service offers the public a means to act when they see someone sleeping rough, and it's the first step someone can take to ensure rough sleepers are connected to the local services and support available to them. The service is funded by government and is part of their commitment to end rough sleeping. Now, there was a representative or two from Streetlink on the BBC's Today programme this morning, and maybe I'm being overly sensitive about this, but it seemed very much like this is a government-funded charity to encourage members of the public to alert their local authorities when they see somebody sleeping rough, so that the local authority can scoop that person up and hide them away somewhere. This isn't about helping people that are suffering from economic hardship and have ended up homeless. And, you know, ultimately, at the end of the day, to make the point once again, if this government actually, or any government actually solved the economic problems which force people out onto the streets at the end of the day, and the societal problems that force people out onto the streets, that would be the way to deal with this problem, actually scooping them off the street and hiding them away in some, I don't know where they put them, but hiding them away.
Well,
I just see FEMA camps. Sorry, that's all I can see is FEMA.
Absolutely. We know that people have been moved out of the City of London, and buskers on the streets moved on. This was certainly going on at the time of the Olympics, but we get quite a lot of reports from London, not only about the huge number of people who are being forced to sleep rough on the streets, but this business that they are being treated as dirt and moved on. And of course, we've had maybe we should bring it up on one of the news programmes, but a story from Holland, which is talking about people who are considered to be undesirable or perhaps get into dispute in their accommodation are being evicted, and they're being put in camps where the accommodation is in metal containers, and they have extra police and social workers monitoring what's going on. So this is more or less the FEMA camps that you're talking about. Yeah. Well, we're going to end on a light note.
A lighter note. Well, it's pretty disgusting, actually. It stinks of Agenda 21. British taxpayers are helping pay to replace up to 5,000 traffic light bulbs on the island of Mauritius. £340,000 is going to cost to switch to low energy bulbs as part of this multi-million-pound green giveaway by the EU. Brussels wants to cut down on carbon. Fiddling with traffic lights in downtown Mauritius will barely save enough to fill a pencil, says UKIP MEP Derek Clark. It's also been given £8 million for a forestry project and £2.4 million for more green energy schemes, and it stinks. And scientists believe the position of the Mauritius, population 1.3 million, makes it vulnerable to climate change. An EU spokeswoman said, "We are an active supporter of helping developing countries to mitigate the impact of climate change and promote sustainable solutions." What a load of
What's it? Well, I think who's the gentleman
Shocking.
there? UKIP MEP Derek Clark, of course.
Yeah, he said it's bonkers.
Yeah, but this is not the thing to say. This is not bonkers. This is policy that's
It's
being forced
disgusting.
through. We know that the climate change scam has been debunked.
Yeah.
But what you're looking at here is a massive UN-based, and that's where the UN has got it, a political agenda to go down the green route, carbon taxes, Agenda 21. And so we look at this as being ridiculous, but what we need to be talking about and explaining is that this is absolutely part of the global Agenda 21.
I mean, we're talking about people laying on the streets because of the current economic climate, but then we've got this money to go and send off to change light bulbs to another country.
Because the people who create the agenda do not have normal human compassion. I mean, this is becoming more and more obvious. Does David Cameron or George Osborne, do these people care about other people in the country? Quite clearly they
No.
don't. They don't. Okay, well,
We're
I'm
done.
sorry we've had such a troubled programme. We hope to deliver a better service to our viewers and listeners tomorrow.
Exactly.
Any announcements?
No announcements today, no. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe to the ukcolumn.org so we continue getting the paper out and doing the shows. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.